Hi students, welcome to the last week of class. In this video, I am going to be reviewing some families to prep you for the exam. We'll go through the grasses and some grass-like families. But before I get to that, we have some few general notes that I want to discuss. First off, your plant collection project is due at the end of the week. Remember, this thing is worth a ton of points and will really influence your grade. So be sure that your submission on this project counts. If you have any questions, ask them now. You want to be sure that you leave enough time so that Erica and I can thoughtfully respond to your questions and so that we can all work out whatever problem or identification issue that you're having. After that is turned in, we have our last task of the semester, which is exam number 3. This is not cumulative, but of course we will be using some terminology, some foundational knowledge that we've been learning throughout the semester. And I know that a lot of the monocot material can be tricky because there are a lot of taxonomy issues with these families. But just remember that the depth of questions is going to be commensurate to the depth of the videos on the families. If we didn't go into much depth on the family, if it was just surface level, that's all we expect you to know about that family. So don't stress yourselves out too much about that. Just be sure that you are taking good notes still. And again, any questions, ask them now. And with that, let's get into the video. These are examples all from the same family, but I won't tell you which one quite yet. Of these 3 examples in front of me, their stems are all round. Some seem hollow, some perhaps are solid. Of course, in this format, it's a little bit difficult to tell. Looking at their leaves, this sample is very brittle, so I have to be careful with it, but their leaves seem to have open sheaths. And remember, the sheath is the structure that curls around the stem at the base of the leaf. I know that this one is open because it just curls slightly, and I can easily pull this leaf back from the stem. So with the characteristics in front of me, I'm not quite confident yet telling what family these are from. So let's instead look at their flowers and see if we get any more information. Here are the flowers of one of the specimens that I just showed you. Note that these are more mature flowers, so many are going to seed. This is a capsule fruit that came from this flower. Here are 2 more examples of what these flowers look like. And after seeing these flowers and seeing the specimen, I am now confident enough to make a determination as to what family these specimens belong to. I'll give you a second to make your guess. Now these flowers and these specimen belong to the Juncaceae family, also known as the rush family. What really confirms it for me is looking at these flowers. These should look quite familiar, really, because we've seen a lot of flowers that look like this. What we're seeing here are flowers with 3 sepals and 3 petals, but when they all look so similar like this, they can also be called tepals, so 6 tepals. From these flowers, I think that we're seeing 6 anthers there. And, of course, judging by the seed there, we certainly have a gynecium. And if we were to cut that up, that would be a 3-carpellate syncarpous gynecium. And that all matches the floral formula for a Juncaceae individual. One thing that I would expect to see that we're not seeing here, these frequently have brush-like stigmas. I think that what we are seeing in the top of this flower is a stigma lobe. But probably because these specimens are so advanced, instead of looking brush-like, that stigma just kind of looks crusty. That's okay, but just so y'all know, brush-like stigmas are quite common in the Juncaceae. Let's move on. These are our next trio of examples. On these, the stems seem quite angular. When you roll them in your fingers, you can feel angles there. They also seem quite solid, but once again, it's difficult to tell once they're squished. Looking at the leaves, unlike the first example, I don't see any leaves here that don't have a closed sheath. And remember, a closed sheath is when a leaf intersects with that stem and that leaf fuses around the stem. And so unlike the first one, I'm not able just to kind of move the leaf back from the stem. Also, for the flowers up here, I can tell that these are definitely inflorescences of spikelets. And with that information, I actually am already confident in determining what family these come from. I'll give you a moment. This trio here is from the Cyperaceae. Really, the triangular stems, that is going to be a dead giveaway, because these are the sedge families. And remember, sedges have edges. Always a great idea to roll around some stems, because usually that triangular stem is going to be a great indication of what you're looking at. Let's move on to our last family, because I want to spend a lot more time with that one. But I do want to point out, here's a great example of rhizonomous growth here. These are the rhizomes, which are the underground stems. And so this would have been running horizontally underneath the ground, and all of these tillers run up from it. I'll tell you, this person did a great job collecting, because it can be very difficult to know when you've collected the whole plant when it has rhizomes. You really have to dig around and keep digging until you're sure that those rhizomes have stopped and you're not going to find any more plant underground. These are from the last family that I'm going to talk about today. On these individuals, I can tell that the stem is notably round. It also feels quite hollow. And then where the leaf meets the stem, I can see that this sheath is very open. And also looking around here, right where the leaf meets the stem, I'm seeing a little structure that pokes up along the stem called a ligule. Now, by those traits alone, or perhaps the process of elimination, you might already know which family these belong to. And I'll give you a second. These individuals are all from my dearly beloved Poaceae family, the grasses, the true grasses. Now for the rest of this video, I want to leave plenty of time to talk about the ligule, which I'll show more closely, and the flowers, so we'll discuss some structure. Now let's get a better look at that ligule I was talking about. To orient you, here is the stem of a grass with a leaf blade on either side. As we move down, we see where that leaf blade really connects to the stem. This is a great example of a leaf blade with an open sheath, because at no point does this leaf fuse together. It just stays open, so it is an open sheath. We could just pluck that grass leaf right off. And then exactly where the leaf connects, this kind of papery structure we see is called the ligule. I would call this a rather sizable ligule in terms of the rest of the plant. Also papery, you might say fibrous. But these can look very, very different in different species. They can be hairy, they can be nearly absent, totally absent. Some ligules are very tough and firm and very structural. And that makes them a really good characteristic to look for when identifying grasses. Now let's look at some flowers. The physical samples that I had were unfortunately not as useful as I'd hoped they would be, so instead I'll just show some images to wrap this up. On screen now is the seed head from a grass called Big Blue Stem, or Andropogon gerardii. It's a very common and very dominant grass in the wetter tall grass prairies. And what's really cool here are these structures which are hanging down from these spikelets. What you're seeing there are the anthers hanging down on long filaments. And if you look at the picture on the right, you'll see these fuzzy structures here, very fuzzy and feathery, and those are actually the stigma. And the reason why these hang down and are so exposed is because you need to remember that these are wind pollinated. And so by letting these anthers and stigma hang out, one, you're able to disperse the pollen in the anthers, and then the stigma are able to capture that pollen as it flies by. Let's take a look at a diagram of, there we go. Let's take a look at a diagram of a floret up close. Now this can be a little bit confusing because frequently you won't just have the palea and the lemma. You'll also have bracts and glooms, which make it difficult to determine what leaf is what. And so I'm going to label this diagram up. Here, these are not the palea and the lemma. These are just bracts, also called glooms in this case. To find the palea and the lemma, I suggest dissecting and dissecting until you only have 2 bracts remaining, and those are the palea and the lemma. So here is the lemma, and I believe this structure right here is your palea. We have this pale structure here, which is an anther, and this feathery structure here is going to be your stigma, which that means right below the stigma, this is your ovary. I hope that helps, because I do understand that a lot of these structures are quite confusing, and these structures are being introduced for the first time, so it can be a little overwhelming. That's all I have for you, but I want to remind you of something very, very useful. So I've gone over 3 families today, the Juncaceae, the Cyperaceae, and the Poaceae. They can be very difficult to tell apart when you're in the field and just in general. They are called grasses and grass-like for a reason. But Erica made a cheat sheet, a nice cheat sheet table that can be found at the end of the Poaceae lecture. I suggest going there if you haven't already. Make sure that all the notes you've collected include the things that she has written on that table. I'll repeat that because it's really great. It's very useful. Check out the table at the end of the Poaceae lecture. It's a great cheat sheet, and it will probably help you in the exam. Alright, that's all I have for y'all. Any questions, let me know. And if you ever just want to talk about plants, I'm also open to that. Good luck and enjoy the rest of the year.